We're thrilled that you're here at the Next Thing Now. And our goal with this event was simply to put smart folks with smart ideas in front of a smart audience.
I'm going to go ahead and keep this relatively quick to introduce DanPink. Many people know him. You've got his bio right in the back of his brand new book here. Without further ado, we're in for a treat here. I want to go ahead and introduce DanPink. Dan?
Thanks a lot. All right. Thanks for that nice introduction. I'm actually really excited to be here because this book came out just a few days ago, and like all authors, I'm going out on tour to talk about it, and this is the very first stop. And what's so karmically beautiful about that, which is a little secret that I don't think very many of you know, but I was actually born in Wilmington. Thank you, John. Yeah. All right. How many of you are in sales? All right. Interesting. Okay. Anybody a consultant, like a management consultant out there? Okay. So I'm going to make fun of you. There's a word that a lot of consultants have used over the last decade that I'm sure you've heard. It's a word called disintermediation, right? Yes. This gentleman right there is like sort of shaking his head and yeah, exactly. It's one of those words where you're like, okay, yeah. Okay. So the idea here that's been bandied about for a while is that new technologies, particularly social media, the web, search engines, and so forth, will disintermediate salespeople. That is, in a world of Expedia and Amazon and whatever, particularly on the consumer side, we don't need salespeople anymore. So let's examine that question here at the outset. In 2000, 1 in 9 U.S. workers were in sales. That is, their job was to try to convince someone else to buy something. Give me a disintermediating technology. Amazon. What was that? Hipmunk. Oh, I thought he was coughing. Hipmunk. No, not a technology, not a company. Widespread broadband. Okay? 2000, we had dial-up internet connection. Now you have widespread broadband. You have social media would have been that phrase would have not meant anything in 2000. So you got widespread broadband, social media, smartphones. That word would not have meant anything, right? So all these disintermediating technologies. In 2000, 1 in 9 American workers was in sales. 13 years of disintermediating technologies. Let's see how many Americans are in sales today. 1 in 9 Americans are in sales. So this idea that the internet has led to the death of the salesman, as everybody seems to say and thinks they're the first one to actually make that play, that's absolute nonsense. 1 out of 9 people in this country earn their living selling stuff. But I think as I started researching this book, I said, I think there's something else that's kind of interesting going on. I'm curious about these people right here. Now, what was interesting here is that when I asked all of you, are you in sales, we had well more than 1 in 9 people raise their hand. So I think that you had the same sort of instincts that I had. Now, instincts are helpful in directing you, but instincts aren't enough to actually make a claim that's actually that's valid. So I was curious about what all of these people, but particularly these people, actually did at work each day. What did they do on the job? Now, I had a sense that they were also in sales, but again, if you're a writer, you can go out and find any example to verify, to support any kind of claim, right? I mean, you can go out and find the example and write about it. But I said, let's not do that this time. No, let's not do that. No, let's not do that. Let's make sure there's actually some meat on the bones here. So for the first time in the first of my books, I actually went out. And again, there's so many really amazing tools out there to do the sorts of things that you couldn't do as an individual years ago. But I went out and did a fairly sophisticated piece of survey research using some technologies from a company called Qualtrics. It's a great, interesting company, really powerful kind of software. And we went out in a very powerful way and did a survey of 7,000 adult full-time workers. Right? The kind of thing that Gallup, we actually had a larger survey sample than Gallup used. So the Gallup typically uses for its opinion polls. So we went out to 7,000 adult full-time workers, trying to get a sense of what they were doing. And we asked this question. Take a look at that question. What percentage of your work involves convincing or persuading people to give up something they value, attention, effort, money, time, etc., for something you can offer? Okay, so that's sales, but in a broader sense. It's sales in the sense of asking someone to come on your project, but it's not getting someone to buy a Winnebago, but it's getting someone, hey, come on my project. Let's support this idea. Let's have your, take a personal example, let's have your 10-year-old son take a shower after baseball practice, okay? Those kinds of things. Persuade, but people are giving up resources. It isn't simply changing people's minds. It's getting them to do something. This is why, as Tom mentioned earlier, why I like this word move. You're moving them to do something. You're getting their attention, you're getting their effort. It's an exchange of resources. So we pull back out to our pie chart, and what we have is we have 1 out of 9 in traditional sales, and basically everyone else in what you can think of as non-sales selling. They're spending a huge portion of their time persuading, influencing, convincing, cajoling, getting people to part with resources. And so the conclusion that one can draw from this pie chart, which is decked in the colors of Ohio State University. I forgot there are Penn State people here, sorry. The conclusion you can draw from this, all right, is this. Well, let's see what it is. Yes, like it or not, we're all in sales now. Like it or not, we're all in sales now. And here's the thing. Here's the thing. Many of you don't like this at all, right? You know, okay, you're nodding. You know what I'm talking about. Because we don't think very highly of sales, do we? When you think of sales or selling, what's the first word that comes to mind? What's the first word that comes to mind? The idea is let's get their visceral response here. And so that people didn't write us essays, we actually limited it, I think, to 12 or 13 characters. So if they started writing, you know, a little short essay, they got cut off. So really forcing people, what's the first word that comes to mind? What, I mean, relationship, oily, pushy, run, manipulative, aggressive, distrustful. All right, so let's see what they said. So what I did is we took these data. Okay, this is a lot of words. We got like a bucket of 7,000 words. And so what we did is we took out the nouns, because some people were saying marketing, which is, I mean, it's not a wrong answer. People said marketing or persuasion, basically offering synonyms. And that's a cool answer. But we took out the nouns and said, let's look at the adjectives, because that gives us a sense of what people feel about all this. And so we took the adjectives. I got the top 25 adjectives. And you, ladies and gentlemen, are in for a treat, because I have something that just makes my heart sing every time I see one. A word cloud. All right? So I have a word cloud of the top 25 adjectives that people gave in response to this question. Okay? Now, somebody over there shouted out push. I don't know who shouted out pushy over. Yeah, you were totally right. That was the first and biggest answer there. Now take a look at these words here, and your own responses. Now this is something that sort of breaks the heart of people who are in sales, right? They're like, oh, come on. All right. So look at these words here. If you look at the emotional valence of these words, 21 have a negative valence, 4 have a positive valence. So you have things like this little one here, essential. Important, all right? Fun. Somebody, you said aggressive. Aggressive got on there. But look at these words that people are using. Slimy, sleazy, smarmy. You know, I mean, that sounds like the 7 dwarfs we don't talk about, right? Slimy, sneezy, and all right? Most of what we know about sales is from a world of information asymmetry. Information asymmetry, where the seller always had more information than the buyer. That was always true. It was essentially a fixed reality until very, very recently. This is precisely what Andy was saying earlier. So if you go into a Chevy dealer, all right, I mean, I just think about, okay, so my parents had a car here in Wilmington. It was a green Pontiac, okay? It's actually one of those cars that becomes cool 40 years later, you know, but it wasn't cool at the time. So they bought a green Pontiac. I don't know what car dealer they bought the green Pontiac from here in Wilmington. But when they went in to buy that green Pontiac, this is a long time ago, the car dealer knew a lot more about Pontiacs than my parents ever could. If you went to buy a car, let's use Tom's time range here, 20 years ago. You walked into a Chevy dealer, the Chevy dealer knew a lot more about cars than you ever could, a lot more about Chevys than you ever could. So as a result of that, when the seller always has more information than the buyer, the seller can rip you off, right? The information is asymmetrical. Here's our little graphic about that. the information is asymmetric. When the seller has a lot more information than the buyer, the seller can completely hoodwink you, right? So this is why we have, most Americans know only one or two, 2 words of Latin. Appropriate, that's not a bad thing. They only know 2 words of Latin. What 2 words of Latin do most Americans know? Caveat emptor, buyer beware, right? Buyers have to beware because sellers know a lot more. There's asymmetric information. So wait a second. These guys are sleazebags, they're smarmy, they're slimy, they're manipulative, they have an edge over me, and as a result of that, they can hoodwink me and rip me off, so I have to be wary. But a funny thing happened in the last few years. That asymmetric information started to rebalance a little bit, right? So now go into a Chevy dealer. You go into a Chevy dealer now, Andy was saying this. You arguably know more about a particular model or make of Chevys than the dealer does. You can go find what are the prices in Newcastle County for Chevys of this make and model. You can go online and find user groups for people who love this particular Chevy. What are the problems? Oh, there's this carburetor issue. You got to make sure about that. You can go in. This is really remarkable. I write about a woman who her family runs one of the biggest car dealerships in Washington, D.C. area. And when she first started out in the business in the 1980s, the factory invoice price of the cars was locked in the safe. They wouldn't even let the salespeople see it. Now, you can go in with the factory invoice. Hey, I know how much you paid for this. All right? So in a world of information parity or something close to it, and it's not just information parity either, there's more than that. Consumers have multiple choices. They have ample information, pretty significant numbers of choices, and also the means to talk back. So that's a different world. That's a world of caveat venditor. Now you know 3 words of Latin. Or seller beware. It's a world where sellers have to beware now because the information is no longer asymmetric. Everybody remembers the Music Man where he'd go from city to city? Try that now. Somebody would put something on Facebook and there'd be like people waiting for him with torches when he arrived, right? So I identified 3 personal qualities that I think are effective in this new world. It basically tells us how to be. I have some other things that tell us more tactically what to do. And the things that describe how to be are an homage to this man right here. Alec Baldwin. It's a very young and very handsome Alec Baldwin. Anybody ever see the movie Glengarry Glen Ross? There's an epic scene in that movie where he says, and anybody in sales knows this scene, where he says, so he plays a guy named Blake who comes from downtown to this company called Mitch and Murray. Mitch and Murray is running this kind of shady real estate timeshare sales operation in downtown Chicago. It's a great period. It's based on a play by David Mamet, but the movie is a great period piece because when my kids saw it, they were kind of amazed because there weren't any computers in the office. All right, they had these phones they had these big black phones. This is like from the 1980s. Right? They had these big black phones and things like that. No whiteboards. And so he comes down to quote unquote motivate the sales force, and so of course he questions their masculinity because that's always an effective form of motivating people, and especially women. And then he decides to give them a sales tutorial. So he flips over this green chalkboard, and he says A, B, C. A always, B, B, C closing. Always be closing. If it's a steamroller, drive to the conclusion approach. This is quite outdated. Because it's a very outdated approach to sales today. I think some of the folks here were talking about this. Early on, you feel like you need to push. I think as people get more sophisticated in any era, they realize that's not the right strategy. Here, it's actually a detrimental strategy to push. When people have so many options, when they can say, go on Twitter. Oh my God, I just dealt with this idiot salesperson named @FredSchmatz. So I think there are a new set of ABCs that describe how to be. They are attunement, which John talked about, Attunement, buoyancy, and clarity. Attunement, buoyancy, and clarity. Attunement, buoyancy, and clarity, the new ABCs. What I want to do here is I want to talk a little bit about attunement. Give you some of that, and then talk a little bit about some of the particular her skills. Let me just quickly go through, give you 10 seconds on each one. So attunement is perspective taking, taking the other person's perspective. Profoundly important in this new world of sales. Buoyancy, the B, is, okay, so who's in sales? Okay, do you ever hear no? Do you ever face rejection? Yeah, exactly. Now, salespeople have grown to basically deal with rejection. It's part of the atmosphere. It's part of the oxygen that they breathe. But the rest of us, as we move into these various forms of sales and non-sales selling, have to deal with rejection. And most of us stink at it. Most of us hate rejection. Most of us go out of our way to avoid rejection. And in the book, I interview a fellow named Norman Hall, just a wonderful man who is, anybody remember Fuller Brush? Okay, so he's the last Fuller Brush man in San Francisco. And I interviewed him, and he said that he's been doing it for 40 years, and he said, when you're in sales, you always face, it's a lovely phrase that he used, an ocean of rejection. An ocean of rejection. So buoyancy is how you remain buoyant, how you remain afloat on that ocean of rejection. And clarity is, how do you make sense? We've gone from information asymmetry to information parity, but that information parity is also information explosion. So how do you make sense of all this information? How do you distill the information? How do you, to use an overused word, curate that information? Clarity is also about how do you frame messages so it gets to the point. They're all obviously connected because you can make something clear if you know the other person's perspective. There's also a very interesting dimension of clarity, which is the move, and it was hinted at here, about many customers coming into the sales process later in the game. Like they're basically equipped with more information and entering the sales process later in the game. And the reason for that is that if people know precisely what their problem is, if I know precisely what my problem is, I have this kind of light fixture that needs this kind of light bulb, I don't need a salesperson. Where I need somebody, where someone's extraordinarily valuable, is if I don't know what my problem is, or I've identified I have the wrong problem. And so right now there's been a shift more broadly in the workforce from problem solving as a central skill to problem finding as a central skill. How do you identify problems people don't know that they have? But let's talk about attunement here. So that's the nutshell version of those. But let's talk about attunement here. And what I want to do is, because I'm drawing on this rich trove of social science, I want to actually try to replicate one or two of the studies here live with all of you. So what I need, this is totally painless, mostly painless. What I need is 3 volunteers. 1, 2, Laura, and I've forgotten your first name. Brian, okay? Come on down. I just happened to have met 2 of these people. That's John's wife, and I met Brian at the break. This is not like, I'm not like a 3-card Monte person, you know. Okay. So we're going to replicate an experiment here, and I realize I'm missing one tool, but that's actually not going to be my problem in the moment. I've got some erasable markers. I'd like to give each of you an erasable marker. 1, 2, 3. And I'd like you to listen to me and just follow my instructions. Don't overthink this. It's not painful. Here's what I'd like you to do. I'm going to give you 2 steps of directions, okay? Step 1, with your dominant hand. Good. Everybody's identified his or her dominant hand. With your dominant hand, snap your fingers 5 times very quickly. Good. Now, with your dominant hand, take that marker, that erasable marker, okay, washable, erasable marker, and take that marker, and on your forehead, draw a capital E. These markers wipe off right away. There's nothing to worry about. What do we notice about these E's?
They're all uppercase.
They're what? They're all uppercase. That's a good observation. They're all looking at us. Is there another way to draw the E? Absolutely. Here, we'll go to Brian. All right, so we go. Brian could have drawn the E like this, right? What's the difference between that E and the E that he really drew? You just said it. Well, it's bigger, yes. What's a more important distinction? It's backwards, but it's backwards to you. This is a test, so this will wipe off if you get a little bit of water. So thank you guys. Give these guys a big round of applause, all right? This is actually a technique that social scientists have used since the early 1980s. I forgot to bring you guys wipes. But if seriously, you take a little water, it'll come right off. This is a technique that social scientists have used since the early 1980s, mid-1980s, to measure what's called perspective taking. All right? When you're given this task, what's your instinct? Do you take your own perspective and draw the E like this? Or do you take the other person's perspective and draw the E like that? It's a measure of perspective taking. And with this as our measurement, scientists have figured out what are some ways that we can get better at taking other people's perspectives. One of the things that drives me crazy about this view of sales as slippery and slimy is that we think about the qualities of attunement, taking others' perspective, buoyancy, remaining afloat amidst rejection, bouncing back, being resilient, clarity, being able to get to the point, find problems as much as solve problems. I think of attunement, buoyancy, and clarity, and I want my kids to be able to do that as human beings. And so this has the added virtue of being good for human beings. So that's one thing. Human beings are natural mimickers. And you could actually see it a little bit at the break, that we have this natural inclination when we're talking to somebody face to face to mimic and mirror their body language, their gestures, a lot of times their word choices. And why do we do that? At some level, it's kind of peculiar when you look at it. If you take a step back and look at it, go to a shopping mall or something like that and look at people doing this, it seems kind of weird. It reminds me vaguely of, I'm going to totally date myself here if I haven't already. It reminds me a little bit of Marlon Perkins' Wild Kingdom, where they, you can look it up on Wikipedia, where they would take these animals in their natural habitat and they would say, and look at the wildebeest looking at each other, and they turn their, it's, maybe we won't use that one on the next stop. No, but it's actually, try it. Seriously, try it. Go to a downtown area, go to this Market Street area, or go to a shopping mall and watch people, especially people who like each other, know each other, and they actually are very much physically attuned to each other. It's almost, it seems choreographed. It's not choreographed because it's so natural. And so this ability to attune oneself physically, not only intellectually, is actually really powerful. And I'll give you some studies, just to give you one really interesting study that shows how powerful this is. There was a study done where they took, a lot of these studies give people simulated negotiations. So they'll take people and say, you're going into this setting, here are the facts of the negotiation. They have someone else play the participant on the other side, and they're supposed to negotiate and come out with an outcome, and then they measure the outcome. And they configure the negotiations themselves so that sometimes there is a way to reach a Pareto optimal conclusion. Other times there isn't that. They're conflicting, but you can do a third thing that would make it a good outcome for people. So they put people in these negotiation sessions, and they give people a little bit of instruction on the subject matter of the thing they're negotiating with. A lot of the studies, there's a common thing about selling a gasoline station that they often use. And so in one case, in one interesting experiment, they had two groups of people. And 5 minutes before this group went into the negotiation, the experimenters gave them these instructions. They say, successful negotiators recommend that you should mimic the mannerisms of your negotiation partner to get a better deal. For example, when the other person rubs her face, you should too. I guess meaning you rub your own face, actually. Not very good drafting. If she leans back or leans forward in the chair, you should too. However, they say it is very important that you mimic subtly enough that the other person does not notice what you are doing. Otherwise, this technique completely backfires. Also, do not direct too much of your attention to the mimicking so you don't lose focus on the outcome of the negotiation. Thus, you should find the happy medium of consistent but subtle mimicking that does not disrupt your focus. Now, at some level, these instructions, I think, would disrupt my focus. But the idea here is they're basically saying, hey, be a little bit more conscious of what the other person is doing, and in a subtle way, mimic those behaviors back, okay? It sounds, okay, whatever, all right? What happens? The negotiators assigned to mimic, they were told to do this 5 minutes before they went into the negotiation. They reached better outcomes than the other group for both sides. Not only for themselves, but they ended up reaching conclusions, reaching outcomes that were better for both parties. And there's a huge body of research here there's a huge body of research that shows that this subtle mimicry is extremely effective. Now, it seems a little bit like sleazebaggery, but I really want you to get over that. I want you to get over that. I want you to be a little bit more conscious. Think about two people who really like each other or even love each other and watch them together. You will see this. They're not doing it for sleazebaggery reasons. They are just naturally attuning themselves to someone else. Imagine you go to a restaurant. Okay, I remember when I was a little kid, I used to like going to the charcoal pit. Is that still there? Has that been raised? Oh, it is. Okay. That's okay. I thought that was maybe raised along with my birthplace. So imagine you go to the charcoal pit and you order a hamburger, right? And you go to the, and so I order a hamburger and I say to the server, I say, I would like a cheeseburger with extra tomato, no lettuce, and mustard on the side. Now, if the server then said to me, oh, okay, so you want a cheeseburger with extra tomato, no lettuce, and mustard on the side. Just repeated back precisely what I said. That server gets bigger tips. Okay? Because it's a form of, now you say, oh, is he making fun of me? Is he No, what he's doing is saying, okay, I understand where you're coming from. I'm taking your perspective. I'm attuned to what you're doing. Who makes better salespeople, introverts or extroverts? Introverts? Extroverts, right. Extroverts are more effective at sales than introverts. This is why, if you look at the data, extroverts are more likely to enter sales. Extroverts are more likely to get hired at sales jobs. Extroverts are more likely to get promoted in sales jobs. Okay, pretty obvious. So this idea that, oh yeah, some gregariousness, friendliness, outgoingness, striking up conversations is effective in any kind of sales function is totally clear. That extroverts are better at sales. Pretty widely held belief. The only problem with it is that there's no evidence it's actually true. When social psychologists have looked at the link between this quality of extroversion and sales performance, not who gets hired, and unfortunately not even who gets promoted, but looks at sales performance. How often does the cash register ring? The link between the trait of extroversion and sales performance is almost zero. There's not an inverse relationship, just to be clear. It's almost zero. It's actually 0.07 is the correlation. It's essentially, whoa, that's kind of weird. How do we get to the bottom of this? Well, there's some interesting, fascinating research done by, it's not even published yet, it's going to be in an upcoming issue of Psychological Science. So, stand by the mailbox and wait. By a guy at Penn named Adam Grant, who's one of the great young social psychologists in America today. And he did this really fascinating study, and here's what he did. He got a sales force at a software company, and he measured their introversion and extroversion. He measured their introversion and extroversion. Many of you have taken these kinds of things, right? It's sort of quasi-Myers-Briggs measures that. So many of you have taken these kinds of assessments. And this was an assessment that measured you on an introversion-extroversion scale, where it's 1 to 7. 1 is extremely introverted, and 7 is extremely extroverted. Okay, so it measures you take the assessment and it locates you between 1 and 7. 1, very introverted, 7, very extroverted. And then it looked at the link between that extroversion-introversion score and how much you sold over the next 3 months. Okay, everybody's working from everybody's selling the same stuff, they have the same training, same kind of materials, okay? So the one difference is that we're seeing is what about their personality? So not surprisingly, introverts did not as well as extroverts, right? But extroverts didn't do all that much better. Okay, they did better. That's a difference. This is hourly revenue. This average revenue per hour. So $5 per hour over time actually adds up. So extroverts are better. There's no question about it. But not that much better. But what's more interesting than that is that neither of the introverts nor the extroverts did as well as a third group, the ambiverts. Ambiverts? This is a term that's been around since the 1920s. It actually gained credence in the literature in the 1970s. Ambiverts describe people who are, yeah, exactly, not strongly introverted, not strongly extroverted. They're not 1s and 2s. Here's the thing, 6s and 7s on this scale. they ended up not being very good. Why? They don't listen. They overwhelm people. They want to be liked too much. They don't do very well. So does that mean, so we look at that and say the 6s and 7s didn't do very well. Golly, maybe we should hire 1s and 2s. The 1s and 2s, they didn't do very well either. Why? They can't establish relationships, or it's harder to establish relationships. They're often not that assertive. All right? So who did best? The 3s, 4s, and 5s. The people in the middle. A little bit introverted, a little bit extroverted. Let's talk about the particular abilities. To pitch, to improvise, and to serve. To pitch, to improvise, and to serve. I do not identify these by their first letter. Pitching means, how do you distill? You know, we talked a lot about in the panel about noise and about clarity and about, you know, how do you break through the noise? Being able to distill a message to its essence is powerful. That's a pitch. Improvise. What do you do when you're appropriately, you know, when you're perfectly attuned, appropriately buoyant, super clear, well-crafted pitch goes awry, as it will in the first 5 minutes? The lessons of improvisational theater offer us some really interesting hints about how to do that better. And it's interesting the amount of improvisational theater that is now moving into sales training. In the old days, sales training, especially in the old days, when, you know, if you think about National Cash Register, the Dayton company that made, surprisingly, cash registers, they produced the first kind of sales training guides, and it was basically memorize these scripts. And they even had, if you pull some of these scripts, I write a little bit about these, the scripts were like almost like plays in the sense that they had stage directions. They would tell you what to say, and they would say, after saying this, point here. After saying, so it was very scripted. But now, that scriptedness, you know, doesn't work as well because inevitably the consumer is going to be better informed, pushes you off your script. How do you, and that's what improvisational theater is. And finally, serve, which is, look, what's the whole point of the exercise? Why are we doing this in the first place? And I think there's an analog now between servant leadership and servant selling. Servant leadership told us to serve first and lead next. I think that servant salesing, selling, is to serve first and sell second. But let me just tell you quickly about pitch, because it's the kind of tactical thing that you could use maybe even this afternoon. We all know about the elevator pitch, and I want to tell you about 6 successors of the elevator pitch. I've identified some successors of the elevator pitch. I want to tell you about 3 of them and give you the science behind them. And some of these you might be able to use right away. Let's talk about this. What do I got first? The question pitch. Oh, this is awesome. All right, the question pitch. We often pitch. When we pitch in declarations. We pitch in affirmative statements, right? Declarative sentences, right? We don't pitch with questions. We should, under certain circumstances. Let me explain this to you. This is one of those things where the research is so clear. Usually things are kind of murky, but here I can give you something so clear you can like reduce this to a very simple algorithm for how to do this. Let's go back to 1980, Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan is running for president. 1980 against Jimmy Carter. Ronald Reagan has people a little bit scared. They think of him as an actor. They think of him as a kind of a crazy right-wing guy. He's running against Jimmy Carter, who at the time is not, or any time actually, was not exactly beloved. I say that as a Democrat too, which just underscores his problem. So how does Reagan convince people to change leadership? All right, so the economy's in the toilet. So Ronald Reagan goes and he's making his case to people about the economy, and so he says very powerfully, your economic situation has deteriorated over the last 48 months. But that's not really what he said, right? That was the fact. What did he say instead? Exactly. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? This ended up being a very resonant pitch. Why? There's research out of Ohio State University that says the following. Okay, it's a very simple proposition, as I mentioned before. When the facts are on your side, when the facts are clearly on your side, you're more persuasive pitching with a question than with a statement. When the facts are clearly on your side. Why is that the case? When the facts are clearly on your side, questions operate differently than statements. Questions are more active. So if you pose a question, people, even if they don't say it explicitly, they think it, they respond, all right? Declarations, people absorb. questions, even if they're not doing it explicitly, people respond to. It elicits a much more active response. So when you ask a question, as Ronald Reagan did here, people say, am I better? Well, let's see. Oh my God, no! This is awful, right? And so as a result, what happens is that they begin to, I mean, you can read this quote or not, they begin to summon their own reasons for agreeing with you. All right? They're not necessarily accepting your reasons, they're summoning their own reasons. Now, people believe their own reasons more strongly than they believe your reasons. Why? Because the facts weren't clearly on his side. He asked that question, and some people said, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? People look back and say 2008, oh my God. I mean, it sucks now, but it was really bad then. And it wasn't, if you look at the polling data and the economic indicators, it wasn't clear. And so what happened is that he elicited an active response, and people disagreed with him because the facts weren't clearly on his side. So when the facts are on your side, clearly on your side, pitching with questions is very effective, and we never use this. So pitch with questions. Or actually, I should eat my own dog food. Don't you think you should pitch with questions? Let's talk about email, because we talked about email up here, all right? There's research out of Carnegie Mellon. Every email is a pitch, right? Every email is a pitch. It's a plea for intention and engagement. So we're getting 300, 400 emails a day. What makes a good subject line? There's research out of Carnegie Mellon that tells us the answer to this. How to break through that clutter. This has been really helpful to me. What Carnegie Mellon researchers found, okay? This is not, you know, it's Carnegie Mellon, so it's like, oh, this is going to be a profound, important conclusion. But it's not. But it's still useful. What they found is this. What they did is they gave people, they actually went into people's workplace settings, and it was called the read aloud method. And people would open their email, go through their email, and they would narrate why they're doing what they're doing. And so they did this with thousands and thousands of people to try to get at their behavior. And so people are more likely to open emails when the subject, read emails directly affected to their work, okay? When the subject line says this is directly affected to your work, or when they had moderate levels of, this is the curious part, interesting part, moderate levels of uncertainty about the content, i.e. they were curious what the message was about. And so basically what Carnegie Mellon is telling us is that for email subject lines, there are two ways to go: utility or curiosity, but nowhere in between. So an email that says follow up, okay, that's neither utility, because we don't know whether it's directly affected to my work. It's not curious. It's like, okay, I don't even, you know, what, it's like, okay, there's just one more thing to do because somebody's following up something. All right, so you're better off going with 3 answers to your question about Winnebagos. That's utility. Or something else on the other side. And again, curiosity works better when people have a smaller email load. And so there's now a greater move toward utility because people have such a large load. But it could be, I'm trying to think about something related to Winnebagos that would be surprising. I guess getting an email about Winnebagos would be surprising, but you know, the weirdest thing you've ever seen in a car or something like that. Okay, it's not. Yeah. So it's basically what it tells us very quickly is utility or curiosity. Utility or curiosity. Any lawyers in the audience? Trial lawyers? No trial lawyers? I guess in Wilmington they have all corporation lawyers, right? Just to think about, so there was a reasonably well-known trial lawyer about 18 years ago, who had a case involving a man who was accused of murdering his wife and her friend. And in the evidence at the time was a glove that they asked the defendant to try on. And the glove was sort of uneasy in getting onto his hand. And in his closing statement, Johnny Cochran said, if it doesn't fit, think about that for a second. It was 18 years ago, and you remember it today. Nothing I said 18 years ago anybody remembers. I mean that. Right? Think about this. So this is, well, I'm going to say a last word about rhymes. You don't want to overuse this, but there's a lot of evidence out there that rhymes are much more effective than we think. And Johnny Cochran is proof of that. Do you remember anything that Robert Shapiro said, anything that Marcia Clark said, anything that Christopher Darden said? Right. Anybody familiar with the company Perfetti Von Meli? They make Mentos. It's an Italian company that makes Mentos. I love Mentos, but not that you care. See, I wasn't taking your perspective. I should have said, do they care what candies I enjoy? Probably not. Let's move on. What they have done is they'll go in and actually are welcomed because they've moved from selling Mentos to saying, what can I do to help you with your business? Let me see your sales this month, this week. How many people are coming in? Let me see that. And what they'll do is they will actually suggest to them a mix of products. Some Mentos, but this place might only need 5 varieties, not 7, even though 7 is immediately better for the seller. 5 varieties of Mentos, and they might even, this is like scandalous, they might even recommend their competitors' products. So what they're doing is they're moving from selling candy to selling insights about the confections business. All right, they're doing the right thing for the customer, but as a consequence of that, Mentos sales are going up because it's like there are very few retailers, especially mom and pop retailers, who are just trying to like stay afloat, who see a salesperson coming in. It's like, oh, great, it's so glad to see you. You know, and so what they're doing is they're welcomed in because they're providing insights. They're doing the right thing for the customer, even if in the short term they're selling 5 varieties of Mentos rather than 7 varieties of Mentos. And that has a long-term, first of all, it's the right thing to do. Customer came to buy something from him or her. The saleswoman said, you know what? This is probably not the right thing for you. It's not the right thing for you. You don't need what I'm selling. You probably need something else. And that person later on became a customer for life. Because eventually they did need what that person was selling, and who do they come to? So over the long haul, doing the right thing is actually quite effective. It's also, you know, I'll leave on this. If you want another kind of guiding principle, it's essentially, you know, how would you treat your grandmother if your grandmother, or your mother, if your grandmother or mother, if your grandmother came, it was like across the table. Okay, so imagine you're dealing with, you know, how would you deal with your grandmother or mother, but then imagine that grandma has 80,000 Twitter followers. That's how you should behave. Thanks for your time.